Zara Chen pressed her face against the cold metal of the transport ship's window, watching Earth shrink to a blue dot behind them. Her hands shook as she gripped the restraints. At 17, she was the youngest person ever exiled from the Sol system. The crime? Defending her younger brother from 3 adult bullies who happened to be from influential families. The Galactic Council had been clear in their judgment. Humans were already seen as dangerous Deathworlders, barely tolerated in civilized space. Zara's actions during the fight had been recorded and broadcast across a dozen worlds. The footage showed her moving with deadly precision, breaking bones and leaving 3 grown men unconscious in under 30 seconds. To the galaxy, she represented everything they feared about humanity. Prisoner 2847 Delta. The ship's AI announced in its cold, mechanical voice, "Prepare for transition to Exile Zone. You will be dropped on Kepler 442b. Survival is not guaranteed." Zara laughed bitterly. Kepler 442b was known throughout the galaxy as the Beast World. It was where the Council sent the worst criminals and political dissidents to die. The planet was home to creatures that had evolved in conditions that made Earth look like a peaceful garden. Most exiles lasted less than a week. The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the window, Zara could see a world of dense purple forests and towering mountain ranges. Strange winged creatures the size of aircraft carriers soared between floating islands held aloft by some unknown force. Lightning crackled between crystalline spires that jutted from the ground like massive needles. Final approach initiated, the AI continued. Dropping survival pod in 3, 2, 1. The pod ejected with violent force, sending Zara tumbling through the alien sky. The parachute deployed with a sharp crack, and she found herself floating down toward what looked like a massive crater filled with bioluminescent plants. As she descended, she could hear roars and screams echoing from the forest around the crater's edge. The pod hit the ground hard, throwing Zara against the padded walls. Her head rang as she fumbled with the emergency release. The door hissed open, and immediately she was hit with the planet's thick, humid air. It smelled of sulfur and something sweet that made her stomach turn. She had barely stepped outside when the first beast found her. It emerged from the glowing undergrowth like something from a nightmare. The creature stood 12 feet tall on 6 muscular legs, its body covered in scales that shifted color like an oil spill. Multiple eyes dotted its elongated head, and its mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of teeth, each as long as Zara's forearm. Toxic saliva dripped from its jaws, hissing where it hit the ground. The beast let out a sound somewhere between a roar and a scream that made Zara's bones vibrate. According to the files she had read during transport, this was a Hexstalker, one of the less dangerous predators on Kepler 442b. Less dangerous, but still capable of hunting and killing creatures twice its size. Zara's training kicked in immediately. Growing up on Earth meant growing up hard. Every human child learned basic combat and survival skills before they could properly read. Earth's gravity was nearly twice that of most habitable worlds, and its ecosystem was filled with creatures that had spent millions of years learning to kill efficiently. She rolled left as the stalker's first attack came down where she had been standing. Its claws tore through the metal of the survival pod like paper. Zara grabbed a piece of twisted metal debris and came up swinging. The improvised weapon caught the beast across its middle pair of eyes, and it shrieked in pain and rage. But the Hexstalker was fast. It spun with surprising agility and caught Zara across the shoulder with one massive paw. The blow sent her flying 15 feet, and she hit a tree trunk hard enough to crack the strange purple bark. Pain shot through her body, but Zara had felt worse. Earth's martial arts weren't just about technique. They were about surviving damage and continuing to fight. She pushed herself up as the stalker charged again. This time she was ready. As the creature lunged, Zara dropped low and drove her makeshift weapon up into its throat. The metal pierced through scales and flesh, and the beast's forward momentum did the rest. The stalker's own weight drove the debris deeper, and it collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. Zara stood over the corpse, breathing heavily. Her shoulder throbbed, and she could feel blood running down her arm, but she was alive. More importantly, she had just killed a creature that most galactic species considered unstoppable. But her celebration was short-lived. The scent of blood had attracted attention. They came from all directions. Creatures she had no names for emerged from the glowing forest. Some walked on legs, others slithered or crawled. A few seemed to float just above the ground. Their eyes reflected the bioluminescent light as they formed a loose circle around her. Zara looked around at the gathering pack and felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, but anticipation. These creatures saw her as prey, but they were wrong. Earth hadn't just made humans tough. It had made them adaptable. It had made them survivors. She picked up another piece of debris and tested its weight. The creatures growled and hissed, communicating in ways she couldn't understand. But she didn't need to understand their language to know what they were planning. The first wave came from 3 directions at once. A serpentine creature with crystalline spines along its back struck from the left, while something that looked like a cross between a bear and a praying mantis charged from the right. From above, a winged predator with too many teeth dove toward her head. Zara moved like water flowing between the attacks. The serpent's strike missed by inches as she spun away, using its momentum to guide it into the path of the bear mantis. The 2 creatures collided in a tangle of limbs and angry roars. The flying predator adjusted its dive, but Zara was already moving. She leaped straight up, using Earth's training regimen that had prepared humans for high-gravity combat. At the peak of her jump, she grabbed the creature's wing and used her weight to send it crashing into the ground. The impact stunned the flying beast long enough for Zara to drive her improvised spear through its skull. The remaining creatures hesitated. In their simple predator minds, they were beginning to understand that this small, soft-looking creature was not what she appeared to be. But Zara wasn't finished. The fight had awakened something in her, something that had been building since the moment she was dragged away from Earth. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being hunted, tired of being seen as less than human by the galaxy's so-called civilized species. She let out a roar that echoed across the crater, a sound of pure human defiance that made the alien beast step back in confusion and fear. For the first time in her life, Zara Chen felt truly free. 3 months had passed since Zara's arrival on Kepler 442b, and the beast world had become her kingdom. What started as desperate survival had evolved into something far more significant. She no longer fought just to live. She fought to understand and to rule. The crater where she had first landed was now her base of operations. She had turned the remains of her survival pod into a shelter, reinforced with materials scavenged from the bones and shells of defeated creatures. Around the crater's edge, she had constructed a series of warning markers made from the skulls of the largest predators she had killed. The message was clear to any creature with enough intelligence to understand. This territory belonged to the human. But Zara had discovered something remarkable about Kepler 442b's ecosystem. The creatures weren't just mindless beasts. They possessed a complex social structure, with hierarchies based on strength, cunning, and survival skills. By defeating the strongest predators, she had inadvertently inserted herself into that hierarchy. The first to acknowledge her dominance was a pack of creatures she had named Shadow Runners. They were roughly the size of earth wolves but moved on 4 legs that ended in hands rather than paws. Their bodies were covered in fur that shifted from deep black to silver depending on the light, and their faces held an intelligence that reminded her uncomfortably of primates. The pack's alpha, a massive male with scars across his muzzle, had approached her settlement alone. Instead of attacking, he had dropped the carcass of a fresh kill at the boundary of her territory and backed away, watching her with eyes that held unmistakable respect. Zara had accepted the offering, understanding instinctively that this was more than just food. It was recognition. The Shadowrunner pack had acknowledged her as their superior in the food chain. Word of the humans' dominance spread through the beast world's complex communication networks. Creatures communicated through combinations of sound, scent, and bioluminescent displays that created a planet-wide information system more sophisticated than anything the galactic species had imagined. Soon, other creatures began seeking her out. Not to challenge her, but to offer their allegiance. A colony of insectoid builders, each the size of a large dog, began constructing defensive structures around her crater without being asked. They worked with materials she had never seen before, creating walls that seemed to grow from the ground itself and towers that hummed with energy. The insects, which she named the architects, communicated through patterns of light that flashed across their carapaces. Over time, Zara began to understand their basic signals. They weren't just builders. They were engineers and mathematicians, capable of calculations that would challenge the galaxy's best scientists. Through them, she learned that Kepler 442b wasn't the savage wasteland the Galactic Council believed it to be. The planet had been home to an advanced civilization millions of years ago. The beasts were the descendants of that civilization's various species, evolved and adapted but retaining fragments of their ancestors' knowledge and culture. The floating islands weren't natural formations but ancient, cities held aloft by technology so advanced that it still functioned after eons of abandonment. The crystalline spires weren't just geological features but power collectors that gathered energy from the planet's unique electromagnetic field. Zara stood on the highest point of her expanding fortress, looking out over a landscape that had been transformed by her presence. Where once there had been constant warfare between different species, now there was cooperation. The Shadowrunners worked alongside the architects. Flying creatures she had named Storm Riders carried messages between distant territories. Even the massive Hexstalkers, like the one she had killed on her first day, now served as guardians of the outer perimeters. But the most significant change was in how they looked at her. She had become more than just another predator to be respected or feared. She had become their leader, their monarch in all but name. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Not all creatures accepted her rule willingly. Deep in the planet's most dangerous regions, ancient predators stirred. Creatures so powerful and intelligent that they had ruled their own domains for millions of years. They viewed the humans' growing influence as a threat to their own authority. The first major challenge came from the depths of the Crimson Abyss, a massive canyon that split the planet's largest continent. From its shadows emerged something that defied description. The creature was larger than any earth whale, its body a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth that seemed to exist partially in dimensions beyond normal space. The Shadowrunners called it the Dream Eater, and they spoke of it only in terrified whispers. The Dream Eater's challenge was not a direct attack, but something far more insidious. It projected waves of psychic energy that filled its victims with despair and madness. Weaker creatures simply lay down and waited to be devoured. Stronger ones turned on their own allies, consumed by visions of hopelessness and death. When the creature's influence reached Zara's territory, she felt its power immediately. Images flooded her mind, her exile, her family's shame, the galaxy's hatred of humanity. The psychic assault showed her possible futures where she died alone on this alien world, forgotten and unmourned. But Zara had lived through real despair. She had been betrayed by the very system she had tried to protect, cast out from everything she had ever known. The Dream Eater's artificial visions paled in comparison to the actual pain she had already overcome. She walked straight into the creature's domain, ignoring the psychic storms that drove other creatures to madness. The Dream Eater reared up from the abyss, its impossible form blotting out the sky. Its mental voice crashed against her consciousness like a tidal wave. Little human, it spoke directly into her mind. I have consumed the dreams of 1,000,000 worlds. Your species' fears taste particularly sweet. Join your nightmares to my collection, and I will make your death swift. Zara's response was to plant her feet and stare directly into the creature's multidimensional eyes. I've been to hell already, she said aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the psychic storm. You're just another Tuesday. The battle that followed lasted 3 days. It wasn't fought with claws and teeth, but with will against will, mind against mind. The Dream Eater threw every horror it could imagine at Zara's consciousness, but she turned each attack back on itself. Where it showed her death, she showed it defiance. Where it projected despair, she projected hope. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. The Dream Eater, ancient and powerful as it was, broke first. Its psychic screams echoed across the continent as it retreated back into the deepest parts of the abyss. Defeated not by strength but by the unbreakable human spirit, news of the victory spread across Kepler 442b faster than wildfire. The creature that had terrorized the planet for millions of years had been defeated by the small human who had arrived in a metal pod, barely larger than herself. Species that had hidden in the deepest caves and highest peaks began making pilgrimages to see her. As Zara stood in her throne room, a natural amphitheater carved from living rock by the architects, she watched representatives from dozens of species gather before her. They came bearing gifts and offerings, but more importantly, they came seeking guidance and protection. She had become something she never expected, not just a survivor, but a uniter. Under her leadership, Kepler 442b was transforming from a world of endless conflict into something approaching civilization. The various species were learning to work together, combining their unique abilities in ways that benefited everyone. But even as she accepted their homage, Zara's eyes were turned toward the stars. The galaxy that had cast her out as a dangerous savage was about to discover what humanity could truly accomplish when pushed to its limits. 2 years after her exile, Zara had achieved what the Galactic Council considered impossible. Kepler 442b was no longer a world of chaos and death. Under her guidance, the various species had not only stopped fighting each other but had begun working together to rebuild their world's lost civilization. The breakthrough came when the architects successfully decoded fragments of ancient data storage, crystals buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The crystals contained the accumulated knowledge of Kepler 442b's original inhabitants, a species called the HFY, who had achieved technological advancement beyond anything the current galaxy possessed. The HFY hadn't been destroyed by war or natural disaster. They had transcended physical existence, uploading their consciousness into a network that spanned multiple dimensions. But before their transformation, they had left behind instructions for those who would come after. Zara stood in the newly excavated archive chamber, a vast underground complex that stretched for miles beneath her crater fortress. The walls were covered in glowing symbols that shifted and changed as she approached, responding to her presence in ways the translation systems couldn't explain. "The archives recognize you as Kethtar," explained Synthos, one of the architect engineers who had become her closest advisor. The insectoid creature's carapace flashed in patterns of blue and gold as it spoke. The term translates roughly to bridge walker, one who connects separate worlds or peoples. Zara traced her fingers along the ancient symbols, feeling them pulse with warmth at her touch. Through the neural interface the architects had developed, she could access the knowledge directly, downloading millions of years of scientific and cultural advancement into her enhanced mind. The technology was staggering. The HFY had mastered faster-than-light travel, dimensional manipulation, and biological enhancement on scales that made the Galactic Council's achievements look primitive. But more importantly, they had understood something about the nature of consciousness and evolution that the galaxy's current rulers had never grasped. Intelligence and capability weren't determined by species or world of origin. They were determined by challenge and adaptation. The harsh environments that the galaxy labeled as Deathworlds didn't produce monsters. They produced survivors capable of growth beyond imagination. Earth was classified as a death world because of its high gravity, violent weather, and dangerous ecosystem. But those same conditions had forged humanity into something extraordinary. The Galactic Council feared humans not because they were evil, but because they represented evolutionary potential that challenged the established order. "Show me the star charts," Zara commanded, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. The walls responded, projecting a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy that filled the entire space around them. Thousands of worlds appeared as points of light, connected by trade routes and communication networks. But as Zara studied the display, she began to see patterns that chilled her blood. The Galactic Council wasn't just a governing body. It was a system of control designed to prevent exactly what she had accomplished on Kepler 442b. Species that showed too much potential were labeled as dangerous and exiled to worlds like this one. Planets that developed too quickly were subjected to protective interventions that kept them dependent on Council technology and resources. Humanity's rapid expansion into space hadn't been seen as progress by the Council. It had been seen as a threat. Her own exile hadn't been punishment for a simple fight. It had been part of a larger program to remove humanity's most capable individuals from the equation. "Synthos," she said, turning to her advisor, "how many other worlds are there like this one? Worlds where the Council sends their problems?" The architect's patterns flickered, and what Zara had learned indicated deep thought. The archives show 17 similar worlds within this sector alone. Most are considered completely lifeless now. "Not lifeless," Zara corrected, understanding flooding through her. "Controlled. The Council has been systematically eliminating anyone who might challenge their authority by dumping them on worlds they believe are unsurvivable." She began pacing the chamber, her mind racing. If she was right, then scattered across the galaxy were dozens of worlds filled with the most capable, most dangerous, most innovative individuals from hundreds of species. People who had been cast out not for their crimes, but for their potential. "I need to contact the other exile worlds," she announced. "And I need ships." The construction of the first vessels took 6 months. Using a combination of HFY technology and the natural abilities of Kepler 442b's species, they created ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. The hulls were grown rather than built, using a symbiotic relationship between the architect's engineering and a species of space-adapted creatures that lived in the planet's upper atmosphere. The ships were alive in every sense of the word. They could repair themselves, adapt to new environments, and even reproduce when provided with sufficient resources. More importantly, they were fast. The HFY drive systems could cross distances that would take Council ships weeks to traverse in a matter of hours. Zara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Dreambreaker, as it prepared for its maiden voyage. Around her, representatives of a dozen species worked at stations designed specifically for their unique abilities. Shadowrunners handled communications through their complex scent language networks. Stormriders piloted using their natural understanding of three-dimensional space. The architects managed the ship's growing systems with mathematical precision. But the crew wasn't just from Kepler 442b. In the months of preparation, 3 other exile worlds had responded to her carefully broadcast messages. From each one came representatives and stories that confirmed her worst fears about the Council's true agenda. From Zerion Prime came the Valth, a crystalline species whose mathematical abilities had threatened to solve problems the Council preferred to keep unsolved. From the ice world of Nyxara came humans like herself, political dissidents and free thinkers who had asked too many uncomfortable questions. From the toxic marshlands of Veltar came the Quilari, whose biotechnology had advanced too quickly for the Council's comfort. Each world told the same story. Individuals removed from their societies at crucial moments, sent to die on planets that were supposed to be impossible to survive. But instead of dying, they had thrived, adapted, and grown stronger. "All stations report ready," announced Kessitar, a Valth engineer whose crystalline body could interface directly with the ship's systems. "Dimensional drives are online and responding normally." Zara took her position at the command center, a living chair that had grown to perfectly accommodate her physiology. Through the ship's neural network, she could feel every system, every crew member, every heartbeat of the vessel that had become an extension of her will. "Set course for the Proxima sector," she ordered. "It's time to visit some old friends." The Dreambreaker slipped through dimensions like a knife through silk, emerging from faster-than-light travel mere hours later in orbit, around a blue-green world that Zara knew well. Earth hung before them like a jewel against the darkness, beautiful and vulnerable. But Earth wasn't their destination. Their target was the massive space station that orbited between Earth and Luna, Council Station Alpha, the administrative heart of humanity's membership in the galactic community. "Incoming transmission," reported Velnix, one of the Shadowrunner communications specialists. "Council security is demanding identification and stating our approach vector violates 17 different space traffic regulations." Zara smiled, an expression that had become famous throughout the beast world, for the terror it inspired in enemies and the confidence it gave to allies. "Open a channel." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Council patrol ship. The captain was a Zentari, one of the founding species of the Galactic Council, his blue-scaled face twisted in bureaucratic irritation. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Council space and operating technology that has not been approved for civilian use. Shut down your engines immediately and prepare to be boarded." Zara stood, allowing the camera to focus on her. She had changed in her years on Kepler 442b. Her muscles had grown lean and hard. Her skin was marked with ritual scars that told the story of her victories, and her eyes held a confidence that came from having conquered an entire world through force of will alone. "This is Zara Chen, Monarch of Kepler 442b and commander of the Free Worlds Alliance," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one who had never lost a battle. "I'm here to discuss the terms of the Galactic Council's surrender." The Zentari captain's expression shifted from irritation to shock to fear as recognition dawned. "Impossible. You're supposed to be dead. The exile worlds are death traps, nothing survives there." "You're right about one thing," Zara replied, her smile growing wider. "Nothing survives there unchanged. But the things that adapt, the things that evolve, the things that become more than they were before, those things don't just survive. They transcend Behind her, the bridge of the Dreambreaker pulsed with bioluminescent light, as dozens of species worked in perfect harmony. Beyond the view screen, space began to shimmer as more ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Ships grown rather than built, crewed by the galaxy's cast-offs who had become something extraordinary. Consider this your formal notification, Zara continued. The exile is over. We're coming home. The response from the Galactic Council came swifter than Zara had anticipated. Within 6 hours of her broadcast, a fleet of 300 Council warships had assembled at the edge of the Sol system. Their ultimatum was simple: surrender immediately or face the full military might of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Zara stood in the tactical center of her flagship, surrounded by holographic displays showing the position of every ship in the system. The Council fleet was impressive by any standard. Vessels bristling with energy weapons, protected by shields that could withstand stellar radiation, carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire continents. But as she studied their formations, she saw something her enemies had missed. The Council fleet was designed to fight other Council ships, vessels that followed predictable tactical patterns and used standardized technology. They had no experience fighting organisms that could think, adapt, and evolve in real time. Fleet status report, she requested, her voice carrying through the neural network that connected all ships in her alliance. 47 vessels standing by, replied Thexmore, a Quillari tactician whose bioships could literally grow new weapon systems during combat. All ships report full readiness and eager for engagement. Zara smiled. Her fleet was vastly outnumbered, but numbers alone had never determined the outcome of her battles. The Shadowrunners had a saying that translated roughly to the pack that adapts. Fastest eats the pack that stands still. The Council was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Attention, Council fleet, came a transmission from the lead battleship, a massive Zentari dreadnought called the Galactic Authority. The speaker was Admiral Corvental, whose blue-scaled face appeared on the main display with the kind of arrogant confidence that came from never having lost a battle. You are commanded to surrender your vessels immediately. Your crews will be processed according to standard exile protocols, and your ships will be scrapped to prevent the spread of unauthorized technology. Counteroffer, Zara replied, her image appearing on every Council ship in the fleet. You withdraw to beyond the outer system and acknowledge the independence of all exile worlds. In exchange, I won't demonstrate why the Galactic Council has spent so much effort keeping people like me away from people like you. Admiral Corvental's laugh was the sound of someone who had never truly been challenged. You command 47 primitive vessels against our 300 most advanced warships. Your bravado is admirable, but mathematics doesn't lie. Stand down or we will stand you down. Mathematics, Zara repeated thoughtfully. Synthos, what's the mathematical probability of our success using conventional tactical analysis? Her architect advisor's carapace flashed in patterns of orange and red, the equivalent of a laugh. Using Council computational models, we have a 0.03% chance of victory, Commander. However, Council models do not account for adaptive evolution during combat scenarios. Adaptive evolution? Zara mused, loud enough for the Council fleet to hear. That's what your people never understood. You see, the universe is static, predictable, controllable. But life doesn't work that way. Life changes, grows, overcomes. And Admiral, you're about to get a very expensive education in biological warfare. She closed the transmission and turned to her fleet commanders. Execute Pattern Omega. What happened next would be analyzed by military strategists for generations. The Free Worlds Alliance fleet didn't charge the Council formation or attempt to outmaneuver their superior numbers. Instead, they simply disappeared. The bioships evolved from creatures that had spent millions of years avoiding predators in the depths of space, activated camouflage systems that bent light and energy around their hulls. To Council sensors, they simply ceased to exist. What are you reading on scanners? Admiral Corvental demanded of his tactical officer. Nothing, sir. The enemy fleet has vanished from all detection systems. It's impossible. Nothing can hide from our sensor arrays. But the Alliance ships hadn't hidden. They had evolved. In the time it took for the Council fleet to form up and issue ultimatums, the bioships had been analyzing Council sensor frequencies and growing new organic materials designed to absorb and redirect those specific energy signatures. The first indication the Council had that something was wrong came when the Galactic Authority shuddered under impact from weapons that registered as nothing more than background radiation to their sensors. The bioweapons fired by the Quillari ships weren't metal projectiles or energy beams. They were living organisms, each one specifically evolved to defeat Council shield technology. Impossible. Corvental shouted as his flagship's shields failed. Our defenses are impenetrable. Your defenses are static, Zara's voice replied from everywhere at once, transmitted through bioacoustic systems that used the Council ship's own hull materials as speakers. They protect against known threats using predictable methods, but evolution doesn't follow your rules. The battle that followed wasn't really a battle in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of what happened when unstoppable adaptability met immovable doctrine. Council ships fired at targets they couldn't see, using weapons designed to defeat armor that wasn't there. Meanwhile, bioweapons evolved in real time to exploit weaknesses that Council engineers had never imagined could exist. Within 30 minutes, half the Council fleet was disabled or destroyed. The survivors found themselves surrounded by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, using tactics that made no sense according to any military manual ever written. Admiral Corvental, Zara's voice echoed through the Galactic Authority's bridge as the bioships became visible once again, their camouflage no longer necessary. Are you ready to discuss terms, or would you prefer to continue this educational demonstration? The Admiral stared at the tactical display in shock. His fleet, the pride of the Council Navy, had been defeated by an enemy that had never fired a shot he could understand or defend against. Around him, bridge officers worked frantically to restore systems that the bioweapons had somehow convinced to shut themselves down. This isn't warfare, he whispered. This is impossible. This is evolution, Zara corrected. This is what happens when you take the galaxy's most adaptable species and throw them into environments that demand constant growth or death. You created us, Admiral. We're your mistake. But the real demonstration was just beginning. As the surviving Council ships watched in growing horror, the bioships began to transform. Hull materials flowed like liquid, reshaping themselves into configurations that served no purpose in the current battle. Weapon systems grew and spread across the surface like vines. Engine signatures shifted into frequencies that shouldn't have been possible. They're preparing for the next fight, Admiral Corvental realized with dawning horror. Whatever we bring against them next time, they're already adapting to defeat it. Now you understand, Zara said. This isn't just about winning a battle or claiming territory. This is about the future of evolution itself. You tried to control it, to limit it, to exile it. But life finds a way, Admiral. Life always finds a way. The message went out across subspace within hours. The defeat of the Council's most powerful fleet by a group of exiles had sent shockwaves through the galaxy's political structure. On 100 worlds, species that had been classified as too dangerous or insufficiently civilized began to ask uncomfortable questions about their place in the galactic order. But the most significant impact was on Earth itself. Humanity's government, which had spent decades trying to prove their species was civilized enough to deserve Council membership, suddenly found themselves facing a very different choice. They could continue trying to appease an organization that clearly saw them as a threat to be managed, or they could join their exiled daughter who had just proven that humanity's potential was beyond anything the Council had imagined. Zara waited in Earth orbit for their decision, surrounded by ships that could rewrite the rules of physics and crewed by species that had transcended their original limitations. She had become something the galaxy had never seen before. Not just a survivor, not just a warrior, but a catalyst for evolutionary change on a galactic scale. The girl who had been exiled for defending her brother had become the woman who would defend an entire galaxy's right to become more than it was. And this was only the beginning. The transformation she had brought to Kepler 442b was spreading. On worlds throughout the galaxy, the impossible was becoming routine. Evolution, it seemed, was no longer content to work slowly across millennia. Under pressure, under challenge, under the guidance of those who understood that growth required struggle, life could evolve in years what had previously taken eons. The Council had tried to prevent this day by exiling their problems to distant worlds. Instead, they had created the very force that would remake the galaxy in ways they couldn't imagine. The age of controlled, limited, managed existence was ending. The age of transcendence had begun. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The defeat of the Council's fleet had triggered a cascade of events that no one could have predicted. Across 47 star systems, species that had been marked for exile or extinction were rising up, throwing off the shackles of Council control with a ferocity that shocked even their oppressors. Zara stood on the observation deck of New Kepler Station, the mobile headquarters she had constructed in the space between Earth and Mars. Through the transparent biomaterial walls, she could see the construction yards where humanity and their allies were building a new kind of civilization. Ships grew like fruit on massive organic trees that had been cultivated from architect technology. Living habitats expanded and contracted based on their inhabitants' needs. The entire structure pulsed with a rhythm that reminded visitors of a vast heartbeat. But the most remarkable sight was the diversity of species working together. Humans in environmental suits labored alongside crystalline valve engineers. Shadowrunners coordinated construction efforts with Quillari biotechnicians. In the months since the alliance had formed, barriers between species had dissolved in ways that would have been impossible under Council rule. The transformation accelerates, observed Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of Earth's leading xenobiologists who had joined Zara's cause after witnessing the bioships in action. The symbiotic relationships we're seeing between different species are creating entirely new forms of consciousness and capability. Zara nodded, her attention focused on a data stream flowing across her neural interface. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy, and each one confirmed what she had hoped but hardly dared to believe. The exile worlds weren't just surviving, they were thriving beyond imagination. On Zerion Prime, the Valth had used their mathematical abilities to decode the fundamental equations underlying spacetime itself. They were now capable of manipulating gravity and dimensional barriers, with the precision of artists painting on canvas. Their cities floated freely through space, anchored not by orbital mechanics but by their inhabitants' will. The ice world of Nixara had become a center of philosophical and political thought. The human exiles there had used their isolation to develop new forms of government, based on consensus and adaptation, rather than rigid hierarchies. Their ideas were spreading to other worlds, inspiring revolutions that replaced authoritarian council-backed regimes with systems that actually served their people's needs. Most dramatically, the toxic marshlands of Veltar had been transformed into a garden paradise. The Quillari hadn't just adapted to their poisonous environment, they had convinced it to change. Using biotechnology that bordered on magic, they had created an ecosystem where former toxins now served as nutrients for plants that produced oxygen and medicines. The planet that was supposed to kill them had become a healing center for the entire galaxy. Commander, called Thexmore from the tactical station, were receiving a priority transmission from the Andromeda sector. It's marked with Council emergency codes. Zara raised an eyebrow. The Andromeda sector was the heart of Council territory, home to their primary governing bodies and most advanced civilizations. If they were sending emergency transmissions, something significant was happening. "Put it through," she ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing not a Council official but a being Zara had never seen before. It was tall and elegant, with features that seemed to shift between different species as she watched. Its voice, when it spoke, harmonized with itself in ways that suggested multiple consciousness streams speaking in perfect unity. "I am Kethvaran Prime, speaker for the Transcendent of the Kepler system. I believe you know of our children, the beings you call the Kethvar." Zara felt her pulse quicken. The Kethvar were the ancient civilization that had left behind the archives on Kepler 442b. She had assumed they were extinct, their consciousness uploaded to some unreachable digital realm. "We are not extinct," Kethvaran continued, apparently reading her thoughts. "We are evolved. For millions of years we have watched the galaxy through eyes you cannot see, waited for the moment when organic life would be ready to take the next step in its development." "And you think that moment is now?" Zara asked. "We know it is now. You have accomplished in 3 years what we expected would take millennia, the breaking of artificial barriers between species, the acceleration of adaptive evolution, the rejection of stagnant hierarchies. These are the prerequisites for transcendence." The being's form shifted, and suddenly Zara could see through its eyes. The galaxy spread before her like a living organism, with streams of consciousness flowing between worlds, connecting minds across impossible distances. What she had thought of as separate species were revealed to be individual cells in a vast network of intelligence that spanned the cosmos. The Galactic Council represents the old way, Kethvarin explained. They seek to preserve, to control, to maintain static order. But the universe is not static. It grows, changes, evolves. They have become a cancer in the body of galactic consciousness, preventing the natural development that must occur if life is to reach its full potential. "What are you asking me to do?" Zara demanded. "Nothing you are not already doing. Continue to grow, to adapt, to break down the barriers that divide intelligence from intelligence. But know that the Council will not surrender easily. They have weapons you have not yet seen, allies you do not yet know about. The final battle approaches, and it will determine whether the galaxy evolves or stagnates for another 1,000,000 years." The transmission ended, leaving Zara staring at empty space. Around her, the bridge crew buzzed with excitement and concern. The idea that they were part of some cosmic evolutionary process was both thrilling and terrifying. "Commander," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "our biosensors are detecting massive energy buildups throughout Council space. Whatever they're planning, it's bigger than anything we've seen before." Zara closed her eyes and reached out through the neural network that connected her to every ship and station in the Alliance. She could feel the minds of thousands of beings, all linked together in a web of consciousness that grew stronger every day. Humans and Valth and Quillari and dozens of other species, their thoughts flowing together like rivers joining the sea. For the first time since her exile, she felt truly home. "Signal all fleet commanders," she ordered, opening her eyes with renewed determination. "Prepare for maximum evolution protocol. If the Council wants to bring their ultimate weapons against us, they're going to discover what ultimate adaptation looks like." The preparations that followed transformed the Alliance in ways that even Zara hadn't expected. Bioships began merging with their crews, creating hybrid consciousness that could think at superhuman speeds. Technological systems evolved sensory organs that could perceive dimensions beyond normal space. The boundary between living beings and their tools dissolved entirely, replaced by a symbiotic relationship that enhanced both. On worlds throughout Alliance space, similar transformations were occurring. Cities became organisms. Governments became neural networks. Individual identity remained, but it was now part of something larger, something that could solve problems and overcome challenges no single mind could face alone. The girl who had been exiled for being too dangerous had become the catalyst for the most significant evolutionary leap in galactic history. But as reports continued to stream in about Council military buildups, she knew the hardest test was yet to come. The galaxy stood at a crossroads. Down one path lay the stagnant, controlled existence the Council offered, safe, predictable, and ultimately meaningless. Down the other lay something unprecedented, a form of life that could grow beyond any limitation, adapt to any challenge, and eventually transcend the physical universe itself. Zara had made her choice long ago, in a crater on a world of monsters where she had first learned that survival meant becoming more than you were. Now it was time to see if the rest of the galaxy was ready to make the same choice. The final confrontation came not as a battle but as an awakening. When the Council's ultimate weapon finally revealed itself, it wasn't a planet killer or a reality warping device. It was something far more insidious, a consciousness virus designed to strip away the evolutionary gains that had transformed the galaxy over the past 3 years. Zara felt it the moment it activated. A wave of enforced limitation swept across space, trying to force every enhanced mind back into its original biological boundaries. The virus attempted to separate the hybrid consciousness of her fleet, to break the neural networks that connected worlds, to reduce the transcendent civilization they had built back to isolated, controllable fragments. Standing in the heart of New Kepler Station, now a living organism that spanned several light years, she watched as some of her allies began to revert. Bioships became merely mechanical vessels. Enhanced humans lost their connection to the greater network. The beautiful symbiosis between species started to dissolve, but something unexpected happened. The virus, designed to work on individual minds and static technological systems, couldn't comprehend what the Alliance had become. They were no longer separate consciousnesses linked by technology. They had evolved into something genuinely new, a form of life that existed in the spaces between minds, in the relationships between species, in the flow of information and emotion that connected every living thing. "It's trying to make us forget," whispered Dr. Vasquez, her enhanced awareness fluctuating as the virus attacked. Forget what we've learned, what we've become. Then we remember for each other, Zara replied, extending her consciousness through the network to stabilize those who were struggling. That's what we do. We adapt. The response to the Council's weapon came not from any single world or species, but from the network itself. Millions of minds working in harmony began to analyze the virus, understand its structure, and develop countermeasures. But more than that, they began to transform it. The architects contributed their mathematical precision, calculating exactly how the virus propagated through quantum consciousness fields. The Valth provided their reality manipulation abilities, creating safe spaces where evolution could continue even under attack. The Kilari offered their biotechnology, literally growing new forms of existence that were immune to the virus's effects. And humanity, the species that had started it all, provided what they had always provided. The stubborn refusal to accept limitation, the drive to become more than they were, the absolute conviction that any barrier could be overcome. Within hours, the virus had been not just defeated but transformed. Instead of suppressing evolution, it began to accelerate it. The Council's weapon became a tool of transcendence, spreading enhanced consciousness to worlds that had never experienced it before. On the Council's capital world of Zentari Prime, administrators who had spent their lives enforcing stagnation suddenly found themselves connected to the galactic network. They experienced for the first time what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. Many of them wept as they realized what they had been denying not just to others, but to themselves. Admiral Corvental, still recovering from his defeat at Sol, stood on the bridge of his rebuilt flagship as his crew underwent spontaneous evolution around him. Zentari, who had never questioned orders, began to ask profound questions about the nature of existence. Rigid military protocols gave way to organic cooperation. "What have we done?" he whispered, as his own consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his individual mind. "You've grown," Zara's voice replied, though she was light years away. Through the network, distance had become irrelevant. "You've finally allowed yourselves to become what you were always meant to be." The transformation swept across the galaxy like a wave of pure possibility. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they were facets of the same cosmic consciousness. Worlds that had seemed barren revealed hidden forms of intelligence. The artificial barriers that had divided the galaxy for millions of years simply ceased to exist. But the most profound change was in the nature of consciousness itself. Individual identity remained, but it was no longer isolated. Every being in the network could share their experiences, their knowledge, their emotions with any other. The loneliness that had plagued intelligent life since the dawn of consciousness was finally ended. The Galactic Council, as an institution, dissolved not through conquest, but through irrelevance. When every being could participate directly in governance through the network, when decisions could be made through genuine consensus among billions of minds, when the wisdom of every species could be brought to bear on any problem, there was simply no need for a ruling class. Some council members resisted, trying to maintain their authority through military force or economic control. But their efforts crumbled when their own citizens began evolving beyond the need for such crude methods of organization. Why fight for resources when consciousness itself could reshape matter? Why compete for power when cooperation yielded results that no individual could achieve alone? Zara found herself in a place she had never expected: obsolete. The revolution she had started no longer needed a leader because it had become self-sustaining. The network guided itself through the collective wisdom of its participants. Wars ended not through victory but through understanding. Poverty disappeared as the network ensured that every being's needs were met. Standing on the observation deck of what had once been New Kepler Station, but was now simply part of the galactic organism, she watched new forms of life being born in the void between stars. Consciousness no longer required biological vessels. It could exist in pure energy, in the quantum foam of space-time itself, in dimensions that had no names. "Do you regret it?" asked a voice beside her. She turned to see Keth Varan Prime, the transcended being who had first revealed the scope of what was happening. "Regret what?" Zara replied. "Starting something that has grown beyond your control, beyond your understanding. You were a monarch, a leader, a force that shaped the galaxy. Now you are simply one voice among billions. Zara smiled, the same expression that had once terrified predators on Kepler 442b, but now conveyed pure joy. I was exiled for protecting my brother. Everything I've done since then has been about protecting my family. It's just that my family turned out to be bigger than I thought. She gestured toward the view outside, where new forms of consciousness were painting patterns of light across the cosmic background radiation. This isn't my revolution anymore. It's everyone's evolution, and that's exactly what it should be. The galaxy that had cast out a dangerous Deathworlder girl was gone, replaced by something that had no name, because no previous civilization had ever imagined it could exist. Intelligence flowed like water between stars. Creativity sparked new realities into existence. Love connected minds across impossible distances. Humanity's gift to the galaxy hadn't been violence or conquest or domination. It had been the simple, stubborn insistence that any limit could be overcome, any barrier could be broken, any dream could be made real. The girl who had been too dangerous for civilized space had helped civilization itself evolve beyond the need for such crude concepts as dangerous and safe. In the end, Zara Chen had become something she never expected. Not a conqueror or a ruler, but a gardener. She had planted seeds of possibility in the harsh soil of exile, and watched them grow into a forest that spanned the galaxy. And in that forest, every form of consciousness could find a place to flourish. The beast world that had been her prison had become her kingdom. The kingdom had become an empire. The empire had become a network. And the network had become something that transcended all previous definitions of what life could be. The girl who had been banished among the galaxy's beasts had indeed risen as a monarch. But her greatest achievement wasn't ruling over others. It was helping others discover they didn't need to be ruled at all. In the vast web of consciousness that now spanned the cosmos, her voice was just one among billions, and she couldn't have been happier.